Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the British Columbia Museums Association webinar. My name is Lorinda Calvert, and I will be your host for today. Today's webinar topic is Better Living Through Graphic Standards, Simple Steps to Appearing Like You Know What You Are Doing, presented by Tim van Wijk, Director and Curator at Gallery 2. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that as an organization of provincial scope, the BCMA recognizes that its members, today's presenters, and attendees occupy the lands and territories of BC's Indigenous peoples. We ask all of you to reflect on the places where you reside and work and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form its richness. As I mentioned, I'm Lorinda Calvert, your host for today. I'm also BCMA's Programs Coordinator. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please do email our office. Vanessa, our operations manager, is standing by to assist. A small bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please use the chat feature to ask questions or make comments. I will read your comments or questions out to the host. There will be time at the end of the presentation reserved for Q&A. The chat feature at the bottom of your screen may be hidden. So if you want to hover your mouse at the top or bottom of your screen, the feature menu should emerge. In an effort to improve accessibility, there is a live transcription service available, If you click on the Live on Otter AI Live Notes View Stream on the top left corner of this window, a separate website will open in your browser. As with many things this year, this is a new service to us and we are testing it out, so we appreciate any feedback you have. As I mentioned, this month's presenter is Tim van Wijk, Director and Curator at Gallery 2. Tim, over to you.
Thanks, Lorinda, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm just going to share my screen here. And I have yet to be able to manage screen share and talk at the same time. So I appreciate your patience. All right. So once again, thanks, Lorinda, and thanks everyone for attending. My name is Tim van Wijk. I'm Director Curator at Gallery 2. And before we get too far ahead, I'd like to acknowledge that Gallery 2 is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Silk and Sinixt Nations. And we at the Gallery and everyone around appreciate the opportunity to live and learn on this land. My pronouns are he and him. And I've been in the position at Gallery 2 for 3 years now. And I wanted to share, this presentation has been brewing for a little while. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but really I wanted to share the power of a consistent approach to brand standards and graphic standards in what you do. And it doesn't have to be big and scary or huge and involved. It's a scalable process that can fit really the needs of your organization. Really, there's 2 steps to the process, and I'm going to divide the presentation into 2. The first is developing a style guide, and this is something that you could tailor to your organization, building on what you have, and identifying your strengths and gaps in your visual identity. We're going to talk a little bit about typography and why it matters, workshopping ideas, and then making decisions and documenting this in a style guide or a graphic standards package, whatever you want to call it. And then the second piece is implementing your design standards. And this is really about focusing on all of the little details. I'll probably return to this several times in the presentation, but the biggest and most powerful part of this approach is keeping it consistent. You'll also find that you need to change your organizational habits in order to implement standards and communicate with your community partners to ensure that all the work you do in developing some standards and some guidelines gets rolled out in an appropriate way. We'll talk a bit about templates and computer programs, cross-platform accommodations, and then of course the fake it till you make it of things. Improvisation and keeping a bit of perspective. I'd like to say from the get-go, the purpose of this is not to create standards for enforcement purposes. Your standards should really support your organization and your mission and mandate. So this is a scalable approach. to graphic standards and shouldn't be something that feels inflexible. So getting into the meat of it, talking about developing a style guide, and these first slides, the images on the right, you're going to see basically the Gallery 2 style guidelines that we developed. They're essentially a 5-page document. You can really boil it down into a 1-pager, but that's the graphic support on this side. So I think it's important to acknowledge when you're looking at graphic standards and your organizational identity that you already have probably all of the elements in place. So really think about what you have, try to assemble a team to support the process. Now this can be internal team members, board members, that kind of thing. Anybody with an interest in graphic design or graphic standards. And you can also reach out in your community for opportunities. When I first arrived at Gallery 2 in Grand Forks, I was a little nervous about having access to supports for graphic design and that kind of thing. And this was developed in conjunction with a fellow that works at our local credit union who also moonlights as a graphic designer. So it's really about finding those people in your community that can help you achieve your goals with it. And I will say with this package, we started out relying heavily on exterior graphic design support. And then slowly over the past 3 years, as we've implemented these standards, we now are down to not doing any contract graphic design. So it is also an opportunity to build your in-house capacity to produce collateral. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Some folks are just having some audio issues, so I wasn't sure if there was, if it might be something on your end. I also just wanted to mention if there are folks who are having audio issues, I'm using headphones and I find that to be very successful. So if you don't have headphones and are having some audio issues, I may suggest that. But yeah, Tim, just to mention, some folks say that you sound like you are underwater.
Oh shit. Well, there is the HVAC in my office is somewhat loud. Is that any better?
You are loud and clear for me, but I'll let you know if anyone mentions anything in the chat.
Okay, I'm sitting closer to my microphone and I will try to enunciate a bit better. I apologize for that.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Tim.
Graphic standards, not technical standards. Okay, where were we? We were talking about organizational capacity, or I was about to. It is important when you're doing this process to recognize how much capacity you have. Gallery 2 is a small organization in a small town, so we're not trying to do everything for everyone. It's really about recognizing your needs and scaling what you do to what your needs are. And that feeds into being realistic about your scope and your budget for things. This can be anything from sitting around a table and figuring out things using Microsoft Word to working with bigger design programs like InDesign and Photoshop. And again, it doesn't have to be a huge project to make an impact. It's more important that you keep it consistent. And I hope the audio is better. So in developing a style guide, it's really important to identify strengths and gaps in your visual identity. We started at Gallery 2 by doing just an inventory of the collateral of what we were doing. So this is gathering all the printed materials that you have, looking at your web materials, and just assessing what you have out there and what you need to produce. We all have different needs specific to our organization, so this is going to be very tailored to your individual needs. And then the biggest piece of the style guide is around logos and defining logo use. As you can see on the right-hand side there, we have a page that shows the logo, talks about the font, talks about the spacing of the logo,
And just importantly around that, it talks about what not to do with the logo. Now, everybody generally has one. Some people have more than one. We had about 3 floating around when I started. So this is really just, it can be as simple as deciding what your logo is going to be and just defining appropriate usage for it. And the other piece is really discouraging improvisation. The other piece we had in this, or that I discovered in this process, is there can be a tendency to want to develop logos for specific activities that you do. And I would suggest strongly keeping with one single organizational logo, and then building out, if you do different fundraisers or have different streams of organizational activity, keep your identity standardized with a standard logo usage. Again, it's that consistency piece. Keeping your consistent usage will ultimately make your organization more recognizable moving forward. The other piece to acknowledge is you probably have more of a visual identity than you think you do. When I started at the gallery, I spent a lot of time explaining that Gallery 2 was the Grand Forks Art Gallery. And I won't get into the background as to how we arrived at Gallery 2, but we did consider briefly changing over to going to Grand Forks Art Gallery, but realized that so much time and energy had been put into our Gallery 2 branding that it would be counterproductive to try to reinvent the wheel. So building on the strengths of your visual identity is really important and really powerful, and you can just, in most cases, it's an opportunity to refine and keep that consistency moving on with your visual identity. Again, there's huge opportunities to build on your existing strengths in your communities based on your existing logo. So if you can think of this as a refinement process rather than a full-on rebranding exercise, it makes it a lot easier to imagine doing it conceptually. Now, this is my favorite part. Typography matters. My background is in visual arts and printmaking and book arts. So I have a vested interest in typography. But here, again, it's about picking a font family and sticking to it. Now, it doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to be consistent. So you can choose a serif font and a sans serif font that you like and that you feel like they work together. And then define that usage and just write it down. You don't have to worry too much. How you use it will evolve with you, but there is a certain power to putting it down in a style guide and trying to stick to that. We at Gallery 2, we use Minion and Myriad Pro. I was having a conversation with a signage designer that we were working with, and they were based out of a larger center that Gallery 2 is in, but they referred to Myriad and Minion being a little bit sort of boring, and which I tried not to be offended with. And really, the piece with typography is to remember it's about communicating. So it can be boring, it just needs to be consistent. Speaking about color choice matters, but consistency matters more. So really choosing a couple of standard design colors, probably based around your logo. You're probably using them already, keeping it simple. And then the other piece to consider with color choice is compatibility with other formats. So thinking about compatibility with sheet vinyl for signage, compatibility with web colors, and those kinds of things. You'll see here we've defined 5 different colors, and to be perfectly honest, we mainly use the orange and the gray, and the off-white is something that came into play with web design. I'll touch a little bit more on the blues and why we don't use them later on, and some of the potential issues around having too many colors. The last piece here is in your style guide, if there's any details that you've identified that you want to change around your content and how your identity is framed, this is a good place to put it down in writing. In our case, we were using Gallery 2 in lowercase and had reached out to various print partners locally to the point where it really was appearing as a typo. So this is where we codified that we're using the name. When you use it in print, it's capitalized and used as a proper noun. So again, that's going to be entirely specific to your organization. So then once you've set some basic parameters, now's an opportunity to workshop some ideas with your team. You can start with the basics. As you see here in our style guide, we've shown sample business cards and exhibition labels. And this is really the point where we were at organizationally. We were just trying to keep that piece consistent. So everyone has business cards, letterheads, labels, email signatures, those kinds of things. And as you do that, you can make your decisions and basically start rolling with it and documenting that intent. So by documenting the intent, I mean assembling a style guide. And really this is, again, just where you're defining your fonts, you're defining your colors, you're defining your logo, how you will use it and not use it. And then it's also an opportunity for any graphic treatments that you've developed or want to keep. In our case, we use this orange line at the top and bottom of things. You can see that reflected in our PowerPoint slide as well. And we have this mesh background that was a graphic treatment that we developed with our designer. And you'll see that reflected in further materials as we move forward. So once you've developed your style guide, the trickiest part is implementing your design standards. And this here is the back page of our style guide, which is just a sample poster for one of our fundraising events. So you see here, it brings together typography with different levels of hierarchy, our standard colors, some graphic treatments, and the use of the logo. And we found we've since evolved this poster format somewhat, but for the first 2 years, we were pretty much exclusively using this format and swapping out the images. And it was a really great way of having an instantly recognizable event when in the community. Grand Forks is quite a paper-based community, so the posters were a very powerful way of communicating that standardized graphics to our community. So as you're implementing it, it means working with your team and highlighting the importance of the consistency. Trying to, so the first part of that is, and we'll talk a bit about Office 365, which is the program that we use for most of our materials. Email signatures, again, making sure that somebody is responsible for setting them up and keeping them standard. I'd encourage, rather than relying on individual staff to figure it out on their own, I'd encourage you to delegate somebody on your team to go around and set up everyone's email signatures. It's just a way of keeping it consistent. The other piece is Microsoft Word is frustrating and empowering in equal portions, but I'd encourage you to use templates and styles in Word for your documents. We have a standard letterhead that's saved in one single place that everybody works from. If anyone knows how to push out the Word normal template to everybody in an organization, I'd love to know. But all I can say right now is you have to individually go in and adjust that that way. Otherwise, you'll end up getting Calibri as your default font, which is perhaps a compelling reason to use that format in your style guide. The other piece I'd encourage you to do is standardize how you refer to yourself. I prefer to avoid abbreviations, but that's something that you can do individually. For example, Gallery 2, we also call ourselves G2. I've been trying to, again, it feels more formal to refer to oneself with your full name. So again, it doesn't matter what your decision is, it just matters that you keep it standard. And a big part of this is looking to change your organizational habits. I like to think of it as building a culture of situational awareness. Design and communication, there's always going to be specifics that you need to have some nuance to. So you can't go in and just say, this is absolutely how it is, and it's always going to be this way, because there's always going to be those what ifs. And this is a good opportunity to empower your team to make those decisions as you roll things out. And then the other piece in terms of implementation is communicating with your community partners to ensure appropriate usage. The biggest piece I've noticed with this is to watch for out-of-date logo files. If you've made changes to your logo, reaching out to your community partners to make sure that they're using the most current logo files. You can also share your style guide with partners so that they understand what you're trying to achieve with your graphic identity. Building templates. So this is something that we've recently started to get into with some of, mainly with our print media. On the left is the cover of our latest program guide, which we send out to members and community partners. If you're interested in being on our mailing list, I'm happy to add you. Please reach out. Lorenda will have my contact info at the end of this. The question is, do you need Photoshop and InDesign? And really this refers back to your organizational capacity. If you have the strength within your team and the resources to use software programs like that to their best capacity, then it's a worthwhile investment. But sometimes it's easiest to either work with somebody with that expertise or focus on the programs that you have available. Again, this is all organizationally specific. We use Office 365, as I've mentioned. It's a really powerful tool and a great opportunity to leverage things. It does have strange Microsoft limitations, and it's striking a balance between using it to its best advantage and also accepting those limitations. In our case, we do have standard Word documents that we use all the time that are saved as templates. Sorry, they're saved as templates, not as documents, and encouraging staff to go back to the template rather than working off of a document that is saved before. Similarly, using Adobe PDFs of standard documents can be a great way of standardizing and keeping things consistent. This process can be as simple or as complicated as you require. It does not, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it is something that will be iterative and you can build on as you grow as an organization. As we were rolling out design standards, we also did a document standards for how we save documents. And this has resulted in a single point of storage for all of our templates. This is a really powerful way of, especially if you have multiple staff, of making sure that everybody is using the latest and greatest template and you're not struggling against random documents floating around. Again, encourage working from templates rather than previously saved documents, just to keep that telephone effect from your style guidelines breaking down as they are used. So here's some inside pages from our latest program guide. So you see we're using the same colors and font family. The style has been adapted to fit with graphics, image credits, text, and headlines. So as you get into implementing your standards, you'll discover that there's cross-platform accommodations. And I think the biggest example, and this ties back to the Office 365 piece, is on the right-hand side here is my Venn diagram of the organization, which was built in PowerPoint. So this is using our fonts, but the native PowerPoint colors, which are pretty close to our orange. And it fits well with our standards. So it's really about playing to the strength of the platform that you're using. Keeping in mind that legibility and visual identity is kind of the most important piece of this. So web fonts, sans serifs tend to work better on web and screen applications. Serifs work more effectively in print applications. So optimizing what you're doing based on the application. The other piece is for in-house printing, keeping in mind the limitations of your printers. Everybody loves to design to full bleed, which looks fabulous. I've come to believe that full bleed is just somebody else cutting out your printed things. So for example, our letterhead has been designed because Word does not automatically scale for printer guidelines. Our letterhead has been designed for the 1/4 inch cropping that happens with all printers. If you're using PDFs, PDFs will automatically scale to fit, so you don't need to worry about that in that case. Other ways of getting around printer limitations is printing a PDF on a larger sheet of paper and then cutting it out by hand. The other piece with cross-platform accommodations is finding a sheet vinyl palette that works for you. Cut vinyl is a really powerful way for internal and external signage to look fabulous on a fairly slim budget. And when you're picking your colors, if you can find a sheet vinyl that is locally available and fits with your color scheme, it'll make your life a lot easier. So this is the fake it till you make it rule. And I guarantee this will work. Implement a no paper signs rule. This alone is 75% of the work. The pandemic, my staff laugh at me now because, and I take it as a sign that we've reached some success, because they immediately noticed the proliferation of paper signage that has resulted with various pandemic restrictions. So this is really just about, in your organization, being aware of signage and putting things up. And you can define your no paper signs rule however you want, but it's really about that intentionality piece of it. There are ways of getting around not having access to a dry mount press. We use a pressure sensitive adhesive through 3M that you can apply to paper and then apply to a substrate and squeegee on. It's a little more labor intensive, but it works. You can also print your signs on cardstock, which looks less like a paper sign. Again, you can mimic that full bleed effect by printing things out on larger sheets of paper and then cutting them out. I'd suggest learning to love your copier or printer and working around that. So if you don't have access to a color printer, design your standards and processes around black and white. There is absolutely no shame in that. Vinyl lettering and sheet vinyl, this is also a great way of looking really professional. In the background here, this is a picture from our exhibition opening pre-COVID, about 2 weeks before the shutdown. But we've started doing curatorial texts on the wall. It's a great way of filling space and making it look really fantastic. I like the the aphorism, it's not final till it's vinyl. The other piece in the times we're living in is the access to online printing resources. Really, if you can name it or picture it, somebody out there is printing it online and will send it to you. We've started using for all of our most of our print collateral, a company called Jukebox Print out of Vancouver, but there's various other resources. And that's a great way for small organizations to have access to professional quality print resources on a shoestring. And again, it's scalable to what you need. And then once you've done that, and once you've developed and implemented your design standards, you can start improvising. Again, the importance of this is keeping some consistency and awareness of it, not enforcement. So you can improvise, but not too much. Your style guide is something you can share with project partners. So the images on this screen here are 2 pages from a design development package that we developed for an exterior signage project. And we were able to share our design standards with the design team on this. Now, what happened the first go round of this, you'll remember we have 2 shades of blue as secondary colors in our design standards. So the first go round of this came back and the signs were blue, which was totally understandable based on the colors that I submitted to the design team, but it was really not in keeping with where we'd gotten with our design standards. So it's easiest to keep it simple and keep it consistent. And this is something that they came up with, using that 2 that is in our logo as kind of a word mark in the background. And this is something that we've since gone on to use in some of our print collateral. It feels like a nice way of reinforcing that brand without having a second logo. The other piece is you can use your style guide to make increasingly granular design decisions. And what I mean by this is, depending on your organization, you have everything that faces the public and that your public partners see is essentially a design decision to make. Most recently for us, we've been working in our gift shop to standardize how we're doing things, how we're labeling things, and it boils down to, you know, what tag you use on what size item. Are you handwriting tags? Who's doing the handwriting of the tags? Are you printing tags? And again, it's really powerful because you'll stand back from it and things will coalesce, because you're using this consistent standard and consistent approach to things. It will really make everything come together, and all the fabulous work that you do look even more fabulous. Really, it's about developing a visual vocabulary for your organization, and the standards are a jumping off point for that, but you'll find as you do that, it evolves and improves with your organization. I'd suggest through this process, keeping a photo library of images that you like to work with. We have a series of exterior building shots that are kind of our go-to promotional images. Again, this will be organizationally specific depending, but you'll have, I like pictures of people looking at art because we're an art gallery. You'll have the ones that you like and that work with different standards. And it helps to reinforce that message to have consistent imagery out in the community. And then I guess the last piece and the biggest piece with this is keeping it all in perspective. This is meant to be a tool to improve your organization and build your capacity, not an onerous process that you need to follow in its own right. And don't be afraid to adjust as you require. We found subsequent iterations of particularly our print formats have been, it's more of a refinement process. So we're building on our templates every time we do another round of promotional material. It's another opportunity to refine what we're doing. And really, this whole design standard is meant to support your organization as a whole. So keeping that in perspective is super important. And then this is a little collage of kind of where we're at now. So the background is a shot of our building with, in the top right corner is our front sign that we were developed. This is a changeable sign. So this is during our closure when our exhibitions were closed. And then the top is the inside of our annual report. On the left-hand side is the cover for our membership renewal, which you'll see we've been carrying that consistent look from our program guide across to the cover of our membership renewal. And then a screenshot of our website, which I didn't encourage you all to visit. There's lots more information on there. But as you can see, we've managed to keep it pretty consistent across while recognizing that different platforms require different treatments. And thank you for your time and your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns. And Lorenda has my contact info. I'm also always happy to chat about typography. Oh, and before I forget, on typography, a really great resource and a deep dive into typography is Robert Bringhurst's book, The Elements of Typographic Style. Bringhurst is a Canadian typographer and author, and it's a really great primer on typography. It was updated a while ago to include more content for web-related things, and it's the kind of resource that sometimes I just cruise to it for inspiration. It's a great resource, and I encourage you all to read it. And thanks again.
Thanks so much, Tim. I'm just going to pop up my screen. Just give me one sec. Beautiful. So if anyone has any questions, you can use the chat or Q&A function. Again, if you're unable to see the chat or Q&A function, if you just hover your mouse at the top or bottom of the screen, the feature menu should emerge, and then I can read those questions out to Tim if anyone has anything. Tim, do you have a favorite font?
Well, we use Myriad and Minion, which I like, so I'm organizationally bound to say that. Yeah, I'd avoid Comic Sans if you could. There's also a really great movie, I think it was on Netflix, called Helvetica, about Microsoft and Helvetica, and it will turn you off using Calibri, I guarantee it.
Oh, interesting. We just have a comment here in our chat from Crystal, who says that was a very wonderful presentation. Thank you. I just wanted to pass that on to you, Tim.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And we have a question here from Megan. Are you able to give us an idea of what kind of cost would generally be involved in hiring a designer to develop a style guide?
Oh, that's a great question. The answer is going to be it depends. It depends on where you are and what kind of designer relationship you have. If you go with a design firm, they will do a fantastic job. You're going to pay more for that because you're working with a firm. I would suggest, well, we've had quite a bit of success working with the contract designer at an hourly rate. So finding somebody you like and feel that you can work with, and then developing a scope of work that fits with your organization is probably your best course of action. And then that way you can work within the budget that you have. If it's a question of helping you pick some fonts and work with your logo and assemble it all, that's not a huge amount of time. If you're looking at redesigning a logo and building a whole new graphic identity, that's a whole other ball of wax. I realize that's not entirely an answer, but it could range from hundreds to thousands of dollars.
Thank you. And a question here from Tina. Do you have any tips on getting all staff on board with new styles without feeling like the edit/correction police?
Well, you know, it's my job to be the cop. I think it's partly what we did when we launched our style guide is presented it to the staff. As you're developing it, depending on your team and their level of interest and capacity, you can involve them in the process. But and building that understanding as to why that consistency is important. But ultimately, it does mean that somebody has to be the enforcer. There is a bit of situational awareness in terms of how strict you want to be, and ultimately building that awareness within your staff is an ongoing process. So treating it as a training opportunity rather than enforcement is helpful. And I guarantee you will find after a period of time that your staff will start noticing things and begin to understand that.
Thank you. As we wait for more questions to come in, oh, another one popped up, sorry. Do you include training on your style during onboarding for all new staff?
That's a great question. And yes, we orient incoming staff, and we're a fairly small organization and don't have that many incoming staff, but we orient everybody to our strategic plan, our policies and procedures, and our style guide, as well as our records management plan, which is guides where we save things, what we save, and how that happens. So yes, that's an excellent way.
Thank you. A records management plan sounds excellent. I
can't recommend that enough, but that's a whole other conversation.
Absolutely. Where would you direct folks for starting to look for a designer to work with, even if it's just on an hourly basis?
Again, it depends on where you are. I would ask around. You can look at, particularly locally, other examples of design that you like and find out who did it. Don't be afraid to work with people that moonlight as graphic designers or who just have a passing interest in it. And it's more about the relationship and finding somebody that you like to work with. You could also ask at your local sign shop who they work with. Again, finding something that you like the design of and figuring out who did it is a great place of starting. There's always the internet and asking around.
Thank you. We have a question here from Maureen. Do you have any tips for creating a style guide from scratch for a pre-startup establishment?
Oh, well, I think the principle is the same. You're probably would like to include some funds to work with a designer if you're building up entirely from scratch. But that's a great opportunity to build a graphic identity, and certainly having a style guide from the get-go would be something I'd recommend.
Thank you. I'm just going to give another few moments for our chat and Q&A in case there are any more outstanding. But Tim, as you mentioned in your presentation, I will be sending out an email to all folks who registered for this webinar where I will have a link to this recording, as well as Tim's email. So if you have any questions that pop up after this webinar, you can reach out to Tim, and I'm sure that you'll have a lovely discussion. Yeah. I don't see anything more coming in our chat or Q&A. Do you have any final thoughts there, Tim?
Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. And don't be afraid to do it, and just document it and keep it consistent and have fun. I mean, the beauty of what we do in organizations is we create beautiful things for people to enjoy. And if you treat the work that you put out in the community with the respect that it deserves, you will be rewarded by people noticing it.
Thank you. Such lovely, lovely parting thoughts there. Not to be afraid. Oh, something coming up in our chat. Oh, Just a thank you. Great. Yeah, I also want to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you again, Tim. That was super, super interesting for my part and very engaging. So thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today as well. Just to let you know what we've got going on in November, on Wednesday, November 18th, we have a Zoom 101, an introduction and tips and tricks for video conferencing. This will be going over things like sharing live to Facebook, setting up your own webinar, setting up your own meeting, and all of the things involved in that. And if you have any suggestions for topics in 2020 or wish to present a webinar yourself, you can email myself at programs@museumsassn.bc.ca. There'll also be a survey in your inbox soon, and filling out that survey gives us information on what you'd like to see in future webinars. If you do get an email without a link, please let me know again at programs@museumsassn.bc.ca, and I can make sure that you get the proper link for that survey. And consider joining us in 2020 and beyond by becoming a member of the BC Museums Association. You have access to funding opportunities, free webinar participation, reduced registration fees, and access to professional development resources such as the Roundup magazine, e-newsletters, and access to job postings, contract opportunities, and more. Thanks again, Tim, for joining us today and sharing, and thank you everyone for coming and learning with us. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, take care.